I recently came across a quote that said, I go to therapy so my mum doesn't have to. And to some degree, I relate to that. And I think a lot of people can, especially people that had fathers in their lives. Welcome to the Mental Health Podcast. I'm Tim, and I invite you on my journey to talk about men's mental health. Before we begin, as always, a brief disclaimer. I am in no shape or form a mental health professional. I'm just a man whose journey through his own mental health has helped him a lot and wants other people to experience that too. So, join me. Let's get the conversation about men's mental health going. In this week's episode, I will be talking about parenthood to some extent. I'm not a parent myself, so there's just no way I can talk about what it is like to be a parent, to raise a child. But, believe it or not, at some point, no, I think still am, I am a child of someone, and I was raised by someone. And so I can talk with some confidence and some authority on the topic of being someone's child. What I want to look at in this episode in regards to parenting is the kind of culture we've created around men raising men, men being raised by men, and women raising men, and how that all plays a big part with men dealing with their own mental health. So let's get going. There was the story in the news here in Germany where, to anyone who's new to the podcast or hasn't listened to the first few episodes where I discuss why I have such a weird accent, I'm from Germany, and there's been this news going around where the politicians and the government is discussing whether or not people should get a sort of driver's license for being parents. Now, I find this a difficult topic, and I'm not enough of an authority on the subject at all to make any claims of the validity of such an idea or not. It feels interesting, but it also feels wrong. But like I said, that's just my feelings. That's not an opinion, because I don't have a formed opinion on it. But it did make me wonder what we can do, because, as much as I'm in favor of government regulation, because, some things are just too big for all the individuals to by themselves, I'm also a big fan of personal responsibility, because we live in a society of people living together, and if we all take responsibility for our actions and for our desires and for the impact we have on other people, then I think a lot of stuff would go quite a bit smoother. What do I mean by personal responsibility in regards to the driver's license for parenting? Because that's what got me thinking about it is that I remember having a conversation with one of my parents, and they went to therapy for some time, and then they stopped going to therapy, and they haven't been since. And I'm, as I said, not a therapist. I'm just the child or the son of this parent, and I believe that we can all benefit from our parents having therapy. Because I have a lot of therapy because of issues that came about of the way my parent raised me. And that is not to say that I blame them for the way they're raising me, because they grew up in a system and they grew up with their parents being the way they are. And they grew up, not only they grew up under harsh circumstances, but they also raised me under very harsh circumstances. So it's not me now blaming them for who I am and how I am, but I do believe had the path of therapy, had they kept on the path of therapy a little while longer, some of the conflicts that we've had and some of the issues that I have may have been resolved quicker. And I believe this is especially true for a lot of men who become fathers. Now, I've talked at length about it, but I'm happy to talk about it again because it is such an important topic that is so relevant for the conversation about men becoming parents. And that is how we treat the idea of manliness and masculinity in our society, where due to the patriarchal structures and the capitalist structures, I am playing that old tune again, but it is just so relevant, and the ideas behind them shaped by former generations of men and still by the generation of men and women now, and the narratives that go along with it. And if you want to know what I mean by narratives, if you are on YouTube, click somewhere here or down at the description below to listen to not last week's, I don't do weekly anymore, sorry, the last episode. And if you're on a podcasting app, just go back 1 week to find that episode again. But because all of that leads to an idea that men need to go it alone, men need to be the sole provider of their families, or they need to have the answer to almost everything. They need to make their own fortune, and they need to have a fortune in order to be valuable for a lot of people, and they need to show no weakness. They need to be strong, resilient, reliable, and just tough men. They need to be men, and they need to treat other people in a way that shows their dominance over them. And that is especially true for a lot of men that have been raised, no, not for a lot of men, for a lot of fathers of the men that are my age, a bit older, a bit younger now, who still grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s with these ideals very strongly impregnated in them. Can you say that about men? I mean, you can impregnate a jacket, can't you? Let me know in the comments below if I can say this or not. But the ideas, and the men that are, now becoming parents, still quite a lot of them are being taught the same ideas and live up to these ideas. But what it all means and what it all fosters is a way that men treat their children, and especially their boys. Because if you look at the holistic picture here, the way that men are taught, the other people that are their opponents and that they're enemies in achieving their complete and utter self are other men. Because men are taught to be this way. Men are taught to be the number one. Men are taught to be the best. Men are taught to, be the winners of the system that we live in order to get fame, in order to get power, but also in order to get partners. And in the heteronormative society that we grow up, lots of that is meant towards women. But it means that they can't show weakness towards other men. They can show weakness to some women sometimes, where it works, or they have this really big protection. They have this sense of protection towards women who are not their enemy, but someone they can take care of, and they're taught should take care of. It does also apply, obviously, to some daughters, because some men are just dicks to everyone, or some people are just dicks to everyone, but this is a conversation about men and fathers. But it mostly relates to boys and men being raised by men. This may not be a future enemy in that sense, unless you believe in the whole Freudian Oedipus complex, then they definitely are. But they are someone who needs to live up to all of these ideas, and they need to learn that that is the way a man behaves. And if a man needs to be self-reliant, self-assured, tough, resilient, and able to make his own fortune, then we don't really encourage those men to be kind and gentle towards their boys, because that's not how this is taught. the way this whole reliance and this whole winning mindset is taught is by throwing them into the water and, let them figure it out themselves. And, men don't show weakness, men don't show emotion, so they also don't show that to their children. And there is this anecdote that I've come across in the research for this episode, because I don't just present my ideas here, I also look at other people's ideas, and I would love to also hear from you and your ideas, your thoughts, your feelings about this. So, men-tell-health.com. There's ample ways to get in contact with me. You can message me or comment on YouTube, Instagram, email, and contact forms. Hit me up. I'd love to talk to you or with you, or bring your ideas forward anonymously, however you want it. This anecdote that I came across was this man talking about his father never showing any affection to him, never showing him much love, but always criticizing him, in a way that he now later, as a psychiatrist himself, has come to terms with understanding. He thought he was helping him that way. By criticizing his son, he was pointing out his weaknesses and pointing out how he could do better in order to be a better man later in life, and not to be, victim to other men pointing out those factors who may not have their best interest at heart, like his father has. But what it did actually for the majority of that man's life was not only to alienate him from his father, there was not really a very intimate relationship, but also to feel very much like his father did not love him, that his father didn't really care for him, or appreciate or thought anything positive of him, but only saw, he didn't thaw him, he wasn't frozen, only saw the things that were wrong about him or wrong with him. Until there was, after his father had died, he found some letters in which that father wrote about his son to someone else, and I don't remember who it was, how proud he was, how great he was doing. But he didn't tell his son. And as I've also discussed in last week's episode, the environment and the attachment we have with, not last week's, in the last episode, the way we are brought up and the way our caregivers interact with us and secure us and treat us, sets the tone quite a lot for the rest of our lives. So this man always felt like he wasn't good enough, because the one person he really wanted to hear it from was the one person that never told him in person, but only to other people. And that story broke my heart. It was just so sad. And it also creates a vicious cycle, because if that's the role model we have, that's the way that children, or that, boys learn how men treat other men, because children, from almost the day they're born, not really, but very early on, I'm not an expert on the psychological and physiological development of children, so I can't really give you the date from when children do that. If you have it, and if you know it, just, let's have a conversation in the comments on YouTube. But early on, children learn by watching us, by observing us, and then that's something they carry on for sometimes ever as the core memory, core trait, core belief of how people should treat other people. So when men teach their sons, not necessarily by words, by telling them you should be this way, but by living it, by treating them in that way, by being an example with their behavior, that's the way that men are towards other men, that's the way you should be, and that's the, maybe the only way they can respect you, then you take that with you, and that's how you treat other people. And that's how you then raise your children and your son, who does it to his son. And I've seen this article many times and I find it hilarious because it's so true, because the cycle is breaking. This is not just it's not a story. This is not just an episode about how, men can't raise their children and men suck, because men, we don't suck, for one. There's always men who are dicks, there's also women who are dicks. It's not just based on our gender. It's how we interact with the world and how the world interacts with us, and how we, perpetuate these narratives. But if we break free from these narratives, we can open up ourselves and the world to a much better place where we don't need to be the villain, because in many respects we are. And that's not necessarily saying you personally, just us as men, but I'm moving away. So things are changing. Men are breaking free of that cycle. Men are realizing, hey, this is how my father brought me up, but I didn't like it. I did not feel loved. And there's now more and more narratives about men can show love without being, weaklings, whatever that means, and show vulnerability. And I love the story where it said that millennials are so much less capable of DIY than the generation before them. And someone commented underneath, well, at least I can tell my daughter that I love her without breaking my arm. So I think I've got that going for me, or something similar. I can't repeat it verbatim, but that was the sentiment, and I love that because it's so true. We measure men by so many standards that just are unnecessary. Like, what does it mean that millennials are less good at DIY? Who gives a shit? I mean, does it say anything about us? No, it doesn't. It just says that maybe we don't have the time, the energy, or there weren't many people around who taught us these things, or that we, prioritize different things. We don't need to occupy ourselves with DIY projects in order not to spend time with our family, because we might feel some negative or positive emotions that we don't know how to interact with or navigate through. So maybe it's not that bad that millennials aren't as good as DIY as the generations before them. Just a thought. So yeah, that's really positive. But I do still, just from interacting with other men that I know and from hearing men talk on talk shows and internets, and how they need to make sure that nobody can prove them wrong, that nobody can, see that they're hurting, or that they may be unsure, because if they're unsure, they're weak and they're failing. And that still shows a lot about how these men perceive themselves and the world around them, and how they think they should be for the world around them. So it's not completely broken. Not everyone has broken the cycle. But we can move towards it more by realizing that we can love our kids and we can tell them that. And if you don't feel you can do it because you've never been taught, like, this is a lot of blame goes towards men for not being able to vocalize their feelings, vocalize their emotions, showing the love and kindness towards other people that is necessary in order for our society to be, better and kinder towards each other. But they haven't been taught. There had been very little guidance for these men, because the role models, be it in their family or in the media, has not prepared them to do that. And let's be honest, a lot of the times, neither have women. Because most of the men out there who've been raised by men also had mothers. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So, as a lot of people that have been raised by mothers, probably more so, didn't have a father than the other way around. But these mothers also, be it because they truly believe that's how a man should be, or because they've also been fed this narrative that that's how a man should be, and didn't have the energy, the time, the capability to question them, have encouraged young boys and men, but through the way they raised them and they taught them and the way they interacted with their fathers or their partners, that is the way men should be. I mean, there's been women out there telling their boys will be boys, or boys don't cry, you are the man of the house when your father isn't home, you are the one responsible, more or less, because the man of the house is the one that calls the shots. You're the one that, take care of your little sister or your big sister, and boys don't play with dolls, boys play with only these very specific kind of toys, and boys don't wear this, boys only wear this. Boys don't want to interact with these kind of shows, but only with these kind of shows, or books, or music, or plays if they're even allowed to do any drama, or theater, or dancing, singing, any of those things. So it's not just men, it's also women that do this. And this is not to say, I'm sure a lot of women had the best at heart for their kids and wanting them to be better. But also, as I've said before, the way that a lot of women have experienced their fathers, not all of them, some have had terrible experiences with their fathers. This is, not what I'm saying. And some women also, teach their boys very good things and bring them up to be very nice, kind, and still strong men. But a lot of women, especially in like the middle class, upper class, and wealthy, highly educated backgrounds, have had great experience with their fathers, because their fathers could, protect them and were there for them and could show their love to them because they were the daughters. And it was okay to tell a woman that you love her. It's okay to tell your daughter that you love her and that you're proud of her, and that you're his little girl and like his darling and precious. It's okay. So you have an experience where, I want you to be like my dad because my dad was great, and he probably was to you, if that describes your experience with your father. But that's not to say that that's then the way you should teach your boy to be, because he might turn out to be like your dad, but for his son and for other men, and also for some other women who weren't you specifically, because there is a bit of a cognitive dissonance in how men treat their daughters and how they treat other women, unfortunately. So yeah, the main responsibility here lies with men, though. Lots of factors play a part, but we can't change the way we've been brought up. Now, it's too late for that because we can't go back in the past, but we can change how we bring up our kids and how we bring up our sons. And this brings me back to, if you are not able to tell your kids you love them, or you feel like you find it very difficult to share your feelings honestly and to share your vulnerability and to show what you feel in a healthy way. And healthy means not shouting over other people, not making other people feel bad for the way you're feeling. Doesn't mean that other people shouldn't take responsibility for if they make you feel this way, but there's nuance to it, and there's too much nuance to explain this podcast. But what it all comes down to is have therapy or find people who can help you get there, so that the cycle is broken and you can be a loving father to your child, especially your son, and that they then can become the men we want more of in this world, the men who you want to be, the man who's loving and kind and who treats others regardless of their age, sex, gender, nationality, whatever, with kindness, and doesn't need to show to other people that he's better than them, because you are valuable the way you are lovable the way you are good the way you are. You don't need to win at everything or anything at all to be worth anything. So this is it. Thank you so much for listening or watching. And if you would like to get in touch, please feel free to message me on the website men-tell-health.com. There's an anonymous contact form. There is an anonymous contact form. There's an email address, tim@men-health.com. You can message me on Instagram, mentalhealth_podcast. You can comment on the YouTube video. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to get a discussion going, what you think about this video, about parenthood, and what your fathers may have done right or what they may have done bad, or what you want to do if you are or are becoming a parent at some point. If you like this content, or this episode, sorry, I shouldn't say content. Who says content? If you like this episode, please, I would be super happy if you could like it, share it, subscribe to the podcast on wherever you are watching or listening to it. Rate the podcast on the podcasting apps. It helps get more people to listen to the podcast. You can support the podcast as well. There will never be a paywall or any extra content. There, I said it, content again, because I want all the information to be as free as possible. But there are costs involved, so there's a link in the description below on YouTube and on the podcasting apps, where you can, for a small amount, if you can, support the podcast. Yeah, this is it. As always, remember, I hear and I see you, and I hope you hear and or see me again next time. Goodbye.